all know that Larry Bird was one of the biggest NBA stars during the 1980s and quite literally saved it from falling off. But looking at him, he doesn't really scream the most dominant player in the league. But we obviously know that he could shoot. But did you know that he can make passes like magic and score like KD despite being the most unathletic players I've ever seen? If you didn't know, you must have been living with Patrick. But in this video, I'm going to be telling his craziest stories, stat lines, and even how he saved the NBA. But before I start, make sure you leave a like and subscribe so that you can support the channel. Now going to the first story, we're going to be talking about how Larry Bird quite literally saved the NBA from falling off the map. But let me take it back a little bit. You see, during the 1970s era of basketball, the NBA was in a slum. Stadiums were half empty, TV ratings were low, and the NBA was full of Hall of Fame crash outs that would basically fight the whole entire game. I almost forgot to mention that drugs were at an all-time rise during this era. But you want to know the main factor that was stopping them from being successful? Sure, they have Kareem, but they didn't really have like a superstar player. Especially compared to the ABA, their rivals, which had Julius Erving, Artis Gilmore, and George Gervin. So basically what I'm trying to say is the ABA had more of a flashy, marketable presence. But that was about to change soon, because this is where these two come to play. One of them being Larry Bird. Larry Bird was born in French Lick, Indiana. And as a kid, he was described to have a high competitiveness and IQ. He ended up going to a college in Indiana State and would lead his team to the 1979 NCAA championship. And this is where his rivalry with a specific player began. And in a match with 30 million viewers, Bird's Indiana State went up against Michigan State. And I can guess you have an idea on who the other player is, but it was crucial for both of their careers. But Michigan State ended up getting the W. But despite losing, this game ended up making him a superstar. Larry Bird was drafted to the Celtics during the 1978 season. Well, how did he play the 1979 finals, you may ask? Well, it was because the Celtics drafted him beforehand, but he wanted to play one more year to go for the championship. Hopefully that clears any confusion in the comments. So while Larry Bird was drafted to the blue-collar Celtics, Magic Johnson was drafted by the flashy LA Lakers. These teams perfectly matched their play styles and made the rivalry more entertaining. Larry Bird ended up having himself a dominant rookie season, and he revived a storied franchise with a small but remarkable turnaround. Their rivalry continued throughout the 80s and gave the NBA a good story to market on. They started to appear on magazines and appear in commercials that are still iconic to this day. But when they played against each other during the 84, 85, and 87 NBA Finals, it drew millions of views. And in the 1984 Finals alone, 30 million people tuned in to watch that series. They made basketball more than just a sport. They made it a culture. And without them, we probably would have never seen how good Jordan would come out to be and how far he ended up putting the game out. Now moving on to the next section, I'm going to be talking about why the NBA feared him by telling you a couple of his trash talk stories. Now starting off with this first story, did you know that in one game he got so bored, he decided to play the entirety of it by only using his left hand? You're probably wondering what made him so confident to do this. Well, it all started during the 1985-86 season, where basically the Celtics were in peak form, and Larry Bird was coming from a season where he won 2 back-to-back MVPs and led the Celtics to a 62-20 record. So in the regular season game between the Portland Trail Blazers, he knew he was going to destroy them, so he decided to have fun while doing it. And in his own words, he flat out said, "I'm going to play the rest of the game left-handed." And in the first 3 quarters using this method, he had scored 27 points, all of them with his left hand. And they weren't even just easy shots, because during the 4th quarter, the game was close, and he was still sticking by this challenge. Because of his 5 possessions, 3 of them were with his left hand. Because by the end of the 4th quarter, they had to go to overtime because of a questionable missed call, and just decided to finish the rest of the game with his right hand. And by the end of the game, the Celtics won by 1 point, the score being 119-120. Larry Bird ended up having a triple-double with this stat line, and to remind you, he was only using his left hand. But the reason is the craziest part, because the reason he decided to do this in the first place was that, in his own words, "I was trying to save my right hand for the Lakers," which has some different lore in itself. I think Larry Bird was trying to send a message to the NBA that no challenge is big for him.